Hi, it's Scott from after recording the interview with Eric, and I wanted to say that having Eric on was wonderful, and I learned a lot from him, and I think that you could too, especially if you have not dealt with any kind of addiction. I think that it really gives in educational insight into that, and even if you have, I think that he could be a really valuable resource for you. The warning that I will give before starting this is nothing against Eric. It's actually all on my end. But so I was capturing the audio. It didn't seem to capture 100% of what he was saying. So all of that, it's probably because my computer is turning into a bit of a brick, which is unfortunate. But look, the interview's still really good. So if you can get past it, please do. It's wonderful information, and check out his podcast. It's The One You Feed. And I'll say that again so that I don't say it at the end of a really long sentence. The One You Feed. Highly recommend it. I think it's a great listen, can help a lot of people. Thanks, and I hope you enjoy the interview. Hello and welcome to another episode of Acceptable Madness. My name is Scott McKinney, and this podcast is a place where people can come and hear about others that have struggled with mental illness and everything else that could possibly come from that. This episode is a little bit special because it's been a while since I've actually had a guest on, but with me I have Eric Zimmer from The One You Feed, and I'll let him give a brief introduction about himself, but I'm really excited to have him on. So, Eric, please introduce yourself.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Yeah, my name's Eric. I'm the host of the One You Feed podcast and a behavior coach. My background is, addiction, alcoholism, depression, all those things. I've been sober a pretty fair amount of time, but the depression still hangs around. And the podcast and the coaching is what I do full time. My career before that was in software development of various types. I think that's a quick overview.
Yeah, great. Just from what I did or what I found out researching you, just looking at like the page that you have for your podcast, you did it with yourself and a friend, Chris Forbes. So you guys have been friends for over 20 some years. What kind of involvement does he have? Like, how did you guys start the One You Feed podcast?
Yeah, he's primarily focused on the audio and the editing of the show. So, the show started, it's been about 6 years ago now, in September, that we started. I got the idea to do a podcast and what I would call it and what it would be based on. And I kind of then asked him the next day, would you want to do the audio with me? And we just started it. And so that was about 6 years ago. So there wasn't a whole lot of forethought into it. My goals with it really were pretty humble. I wanted to, I thought it would be good for me to immerse myself in positive ideas, and I thought it would give him and I a chance to spend more time together, which is something we weren't doing enough of. So on both those counts, it has been a success. And then it turned into what I do for a career and a living, which was completely unexpected and not planned, but lovely.
Yeah, I feel like for a lot of people to start like brands that kind of take over their life in a positive way, I feel like you can't go into it with the expectation of like it becoming your daytime job, really, because like you never know what's going to happen. But I don't know. I mean, what I find remarkable about basically anybody starting anything is the fact that it's so hard to take something from just an initial concept, as you said, where you just kind of had the idea and you pitched it to your friend, and then all of a sudden 6 years later you're still doing it. It's to me, it's always nuts when someone ever actually like they follow through with that. So what kind of motivation allowed you to do that? Was it just the kind of therapeutic, cathartic feeling that you got from it, or was there something else?
Yeah, that's a really good question that I don't know that I can give an exact answer for. It's funny, most of my life, I felt like I was the kind of person who did what you described. Like I could get an idea, but I couldn't follow it through anywhere. And then somewhere about 10 years ago, I decided I was going to start a solar energy company, and I had a full-time job at the time, so I had to do that kind of on the side. And I don't know, I sort of learned through that process how to just day after day show up and put in effort. Um, and that's what happened with the podcast. I mean, it was 4.5 years that I held a full-time job and did the podcast and the coaching work. So, I mean, it was 4.5 years. That's a lot of work. And my full-time job was a pretty demanding professional career. I wasn't phoning it in. And so, I don't know how. I mean, I think when we started it in the beginning, there was the motivation because it was just interesting and exciting to do. I seem to have a personality that just likes to do things. I get bored. I'm not real good at just doing nothing.
Yeah.
So I think my personality type helps a little bit. And then, after a little while, we made a commitment, a new episode out every Tuesday, right? And all of a sudden I was like, well, wow, there are people listening. And people are emailing me saying like the show's helping them. So then all of a sudden there was an additional motivation, right? And that motivation was, I had made a commitment to people that there was going to be an episode out every Tuesday night. And yeah, and now almost 6 years later, I mean, this week is our 300th episode. And, we've never missed a Tuesday. So, and I don't say that to brag so much as I say it just, something about the commitment level that somehow we found through this.
Yeah, I mean, first off, congrats on episode 300 coming up.
Thank you. Thank you.
Because that's a huge deal. Like, I'm sitting here, this will be episode 47 for me. And
Yep.
I mean, even getting here, like, I started off my first 2 months of this, I actually did it bi-weekly.
Yep.
So I was doing it every other Monday. And then after a while, I was just like, well, I like doing it, so why don't I just make it a more frequent thing?
Right.
And it just kind of transformed into what it's become and what it's still becoming.
Yep. Where's your motivation to keep doing it come from?
I mean, just like for you, it's a hard question to answer. It's hard to give like one definitive thing. So for me, I actually am in a similar boat of I get bored easily. And so like if you ask me what I have going on, I can never just give you like a list of one project. It's a list of like 10 or 15 that I'm always trying to work through and brainstorm. But one thing that kind of made me interested was I actually had probably about a year and a half ago was like, so I struggle from depression, and that was like the peak of it, where it was very, 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 very close to something potentially more permanently damaging. And I kind of just, I kind of stepped back from that moment and tried to think about what was going through my head. And part of the reason that I have felt much more comfortable and way less suicidal is maybe not even understanding everything that's going through my brain, but trying to understand it to the best of my ability and then trying to put it in a format that it might be able to help other people figure out what's going through their heads. So it's something that's so hard to figure out. And for me personally, it was something that it took so much bad to happen before I even considered thinking about it and trying to see like what was causing it. And so I figure if I can help other people, that's the ultimate goal, right?
Yep. You said something else there that I think is interesting, which was what? My mind just went completely blank.
That's okay. No joke, like I do that in basically every episode of this podcast. I'm like saying something and then I'm like, wow, that'd be a really cool point to come back to later. And then I come back to it and I'm like, just kidding, it's totally gone.
Oh, it came back. So yeah, it was that you talked about like having so many different projects. And I think one of the things that I learned when I was trying to do that solar energy company and carried through in the podcast was like, I have to commit to certain things. Like, my nature would be to juggle 15 projects. And I just went, you know what? If I want any of these to actually see the light of day and be something that's meaningful and powerful, and that's not the only reason to do things. So I'm not saying like everybody, you should make sure, but for me, I just felt like if I want to do any of these well, I need to sort of narrow the focus. So an example, doing the podcast and doing the solar energy company meant I quit playing in band. Like that was the cost at the time, right? There were other reasons it didn't work. No, I didn't give up but I had to sort of, I had to say, well, I can't do it all. I can't do it all. And so, um, you know, focusing is part of the game, at least for me.
Yeah, and I feel like I'm hitting that point where I'm starting to be like, okay, well, I'm juggling far too many things.
Yeah.
And I'm, you take the step back and you're just like, well, what projects can I cut out? And maybe not even necessarily cut out, but kind of just set on a back burner. So,
Right.
for example, I'm working a job, working this podcast at the same time. And if I could eventually get to a point where I am self sustaining through this or, um, whatever else, like, whatever other idea I pursue, if there is any,
Hmm.
if I can become self sufficient through that and quit the job, then boom, that's an extra like 8 or 9 hours out of the day that you can focus on the same
Exactly.
projects that you've already committed to,
Yep.
along with the extra stuff. And it's cool to see that dynamic like in real time.
Yep. For sure.
So to dive a little bit more into the actual the creation of your podcast and everything that's come from it, one thing that I have never been able to give any sort of insight to my audience about is addiction. That's never something that I've struggled with, and
Hmm.
I'm curious to know a little bit about you know how you got to addiction. Like what caused you to initially start using addictive substances, and what happened from there?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess I'll start with I was much younger at the time, but when I was in high school, I had a couple drinks and smoked a little pot, like most people did. And I remember it was sort of odd the way I did it, but I didn't do it very often. But when I was really in a lot of pain. My girlfriend broke up with me and started dating my best friend, and somebody offered me a drink, and I took the drink, and it was like, in retrospect, it feels like a switch flipped, right? And because basically all of a sudden I felt fine, and so that sort of kicked off about 6 years of alcoholism and an addiction for me that eventually led, at the age of 24, I was addicted to heroin. I was homeless. I was facing, you know, a lot of time in jail. I had hepatitis C. I weighed 100 pounds. Um, so, how does someone get there, right? Is really an interesting question. How do you go from taking a drink to 6 years later being a homeless heroin addict? And I don't think there are any really good answers. I don't think anybody knows quite what causes addiction. Addiction is, people often say addiction is a disease. I think it's easier to think of it almost as a syndrome. It's a cluster of symptoms that come together. So a lot of people who have addiction have some degree of what are considered adverse childhood experiences, whether that be capital T trauma like physical or sexual abuse, or less uh, robust trauma, but neglect or dysfunction. So there's a lot of studies out there that show the more adverse childhood experiences someone has, the likelihood of addiction increases. So there's a component of that, right? There appears to be a component of a genetic nature to it. And then I think there's kind of all the normal things that happen in life. Who are you with? What's the social circle you're with? What are you drawn to? I was a musician, so I was in a crowd that drinking and drugs was a pretty acceptable, if not expected, in a lot of cases, behavior, at least in a certain crowd. So I think there was kind of all that stuff comes together, and causes addiction. And so I don't know quite why I turned it, why I became an addict. I know some of the underlying things, but ultimately the exact causes and conditions are hard to tweeze out. The good news is you don't need to know exactly what they are in order to get better. At least I didn't, and lots of people I know.
Yeah, I mean, so what I thought was interesting based on what you just said was actually you said that when you initially had your first encounter with alcohol, it was something that made you feel better and happier, and it kind of took away from all of the like negativity. And I know that that's
Hmm.
something that like I've talked to other people that are in the same boat where they have that experience and then all of a sudden boom, they have this escape that's just available to them.
Yep.
One thing that, going back to kind of why I started the podcast, believe it or not, is the first time that I drank. I did not drink until very late. Like, so I was 21 whenever I did, so I didn't have any, encounters with it younger. But the first time that I drank and got like drunk to the point of vomiting, there was never a point for me, and that's only ever happened that one time, believe it or not. And the reason is I never had that moment where I felt better.
Hmm. Hmm.
As I was sitting there and I was like completely drunk and I did not have all of my motor functions working totally fine. I didn't feel better, and then that was basically the end of any sort of like bad relationship I had
Yep.
with it. It just never happened.
Yep. Yep. And I think that people range from what you just do, and those people don't drink, and then there's people who do enjoy it, but but not like crazy enjoy it,
Yeah.
right? And those people become, tend to become social drinkers. And then there are some people that it seems to do something for in a different way. And I happen to be one of those people. And the other thing I think starts to happen with addiction, right, is that you pursue a substance because your life isn't feeling great. But then as you pursue the substance, you make your life worse. And then you sober up and you go, oh God, it's worse than it was before. And so you go, I can't handle that. And so you use again. And then your life gets worse. It's like it's this vicious circle, right?
Yeah.
It's just the addiction perpetuates worse and worse behavior, which perpetuates feeling worse and worse, which perpetuates shame and guilt. And the whole thing, it just picks up a life of its own.
Yeah, I had someone that I had known in college, actually. They had that exact vicious cycle, basically. I mean, some variation of it, where they had really, really bad ADHD. So, in
Hmm.
order to combat that, they were taking Adderall. But their problem was this cycle of the Adderall that they were taking. One of the side effects is can increase depression. He suffered from depression. So when he took Adderall, he felt significantly more depressed. So
Mm.
whenever he stopped taking Adderall, he would feel again significant. He would feel more depressed there, and then he would keep choosing which one he was going to use, which is either Adderall to feel depressed because of the drug and just kind of I don't know, whatever goes with that, and then not using it and having to deal with the kind of effects of the ADHD and not being able to focus, along with already struggling with depression.
Right.
And it was a really unfortunate thing to watch happen because he eventually turned to harder substances because I could see it, like he really just didn't know where to go to feel any better.
Yep. 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 And a lot of people have addiction, mental illness is coexistent, right? There's a lot of addiction and alcoholism also suffer from some degree of mental illness. I guess you could classify addiction as a mental illness, but a lot of people, a lot of people deal with depression. A lot of people deal with anxiety. There's a lot of dual diagnosis going on there.
Yeah, it just there are a lot of I mean there are so many different factors that can cause it or can prevent people from ever really struggling from it that it's impossible to ever look at it. And this is the same for basically anything in any type of like mental health space where there's never going to be this clear cut definition of anything that's out there because it'll affect literally everybody completely differently. And
That's
there might be some similarities, but it'll still be wildly different.
Yeah, yeah. I think and they're not, you know, they're not they're not simple problems. Neither
Not at all.
depression nor they're not simple problems to solve. Although I have seen an awful lot of people get sober. So I mean, I see it happen. I've seen it happen a lot. But I've seen a lot of people also not get sober, and a lot of people die.
Yeah.
You're close enough to it for long enough, that's what you start to see.
So, with you saying all that and how, at one point you were homeless and addicted, what what was the thing, or was there anything specific that made you realize, like, hey, maybe I should try to sober up and kind of like get a full-time job at a solar company? Like, was there anything specific that did that, or what caused it?
Yeah, well, I had tried to get sober several times before I did. I had been in treatment a couple times. I had tried various different things, but you know, there came a point where like I said, I was facing a lot of jail time. So I basically got arrested, and when I got arrested, the van that I had been sleeping in was gone because it was the owner of a restaurant I was working at. I lost that job, which is where I was getting a lot of the money to feed my dope habit. And so I went back into detox really for no reason except I didn't know what else to do, and I knew I was going to be really dope sick, and I was just a mess. And so I went into detox, and when I was there, they said, we think you should go into our 30-day treatment program. And I initially said no. I was like, no, I mean, I don't think so. Like I had some big fancy life to get back to. I have no idea what I could have been thinking, like, oh, I need to go do. But I went back to my room, and I had, in recovery, some people refer to them as a moment of clarity, right? And my moment of clarity was like, I think I'm going to die if I keep hepatitis C. I weighed 100 pounds. I was in really bad shape. And so I just went back to him. I said, all right, I'll go into the 30-day treatment program. And that kind of started it. And I think that while I was in that program, I got detoxed, I got cleaned up, and I think I just started to see hope. And I was sort of presented with things that I could. And so, that was sort of what launched me on that. And then when I got out of that, I just was really involved in 12-step recovery for quite some time. That really helped a lot too.
So I know that one thing that comes with homelessness and the kind of past that you had is there's that kind of stigma around it. And even though, I mean, everybody has their own demons and everything, there's always this stigma against specifically basically what you went through. So how did you deal with the stigma, and how did you go from 100 pounds with jail time, addicted, to regular full-time job? Or I say regular as if there is such a thing, but more traditional work.
Yeah, well, so I was out of work, not working for about 7 months, because after I got out of the 30-day treatment program, I was home for a little bit, and then I went into a halfway house for 6 months. So I was about 7 months out of employment, and so and I got a job at a place called CompuServe. CompuServe was one of the very early online providers before normal people got on the internet. It was even a precursor to like the AOL days. So it was a really cool company, and I got a job in the customer service department. And I got that job by going in and being completely honest. I just went in and said, like, hey, they're like, well, you've only ever worked in a restaurant. It doesn't appear you've worked in close to a year. And I just said, here's my story. I just told, I mean, I didn't go into graphic detail. I don't know that I said like, oh, I don't know if I said I was a heroin addict. I don't know what I said, but I said, look, I've been dealing with addiction. I was in a halfway house. I'm out. I'm better now. And I'm really motivated, and I got the job. And so, I don't know that that's what I recommend for everyone, but in a lot of cases, that worked for me. I have a lot of benefits that come from being we talk about privilege these days, right? In the world, right? And I think being a white male from an upper middle class family and getting the sort of education I got in high school gave me certain advantages that a lot of people I went to treatment with and a lot of people I was in the halfway house just didn't have, right? And so, I'm not sure that a lot of the people I went through treatment with could have walked in and said that and gotten the job that I got. So I recognize, I think, comes from the benefits and the privileges that I had. But that was my approach, and it's the approach I have kind of counseled a lot of people to use, which is like, you just got to right into a.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm pretty fresh out of college. Like, I'm in the early job search, and a lot of the employers that I'm looking to hopefully work for in the future, a lot of the time that we're talking, it's these conversations about like what I've done and everything. And I feel like any time that I have in the past, and I'm not the perfect interviewer, and I've gone through a lot of like interviewing over the past few years, so I've gotten a lot better. And in the early interviews, I can kind of reflect back at them and find whenever I was kind of bullshitting a little bit, and like I could tell that the employer was like looking back, it's hilarious to kind of laugh about it because I can see that they obviously saw through like the shroud of what I was saying. And even I feel like, and obviously I can't say to this through or speak to this through personal experience, but I mean just simply from regular, like coming from a place of just college graduation, and if you're more honest about even what you can't do and your willingness to learn, like that's so much more important than, I don't know, coming in being totally perfect and lying your way up the ladder or whatever else.
Yeah, yeah, it totally depends where you're interviewing, who you're,
Yeah.
all that. But people tend to hire people they like. I mean, that's just a reality. Like,
Yeah.
yes, qualifications are important. I mean, I was in management positions for a long time in the software development world, right? And hiring someone that you like. I mean, I know I did it a lot, it overrode other considerations. Again, I wasn't like, oh, let me just hire my favorite person out of these interviews. They've got to have the right skills. But within that, and I think that you like people that are authentic and genuine, right? And a lot of people can feel it when.
Yeah. I mean, it just, you can even, so like right now I'm working in a customer service position. And even whenever someone comes up to the counter to say, like, even whenever they're saying hello, you can always see, like, the quality of person just through their introduction, the smile on their face. I mean, that's exactly why, like, places like Chick-fil-A have all of their employees say, I don't remember what they say, but, like, you're welcome or whatever, or, like,
Right.
no, my pleasure, after every
Yeah.
single, like, thank you or whatever. It just, I mean, it's this really common thing that everybody always talks about, which is like service with a smile. But if you can really have an authentic smile behind it, and you can kind of put a person behind it that you can see through just how they're acting and how they're speaking, like it really does speak volumes, because that it's a really, really hard thing to fake.
It is. It is. I agree.
So here's something that I this is probably the question that I'm most excited to ask you about, which is, so you went from your experiences to what I would say is an influencer in the space now, like people that have questions and that are going through it or that have been through it and are still struggling with it. You're someone that they can kind of come to, and they can listen to the podcast, or they can, whatever resources you have out there, they can use you as a way to kind of give them hope for the future. Do you ever struggle with that? Like, and I know that seems like a weird question, because being in that role always makes, like, it seems from the outside like it can be so great, and I do think it's great, but do you ever have a hard time, like, thinking, oh, well, maybe I'm not the kind of person that they should come to, or am I really helping? Like, do you ever have those questions, or have you kind of just moved past and...
Well, so a couple things. One is, I never pretend that like I am like I am fixed in some great way. I never sort of, I try never to say like I'm way up here on this pedestal and you're all down there, right? I mean, I talk about the fact like I still deal with, like, it still comes. There are times that I have days where I feel lousy, right? And so what I think I offer people is, here are the tools that have worked for me in order to get sober and to deal with depression and to live what I think is a pretty good life with those situations or those constraints or whatever you want to call them, those conditions. So I think partially, since I don't set myself out to be a certain way that I'm not, I don't have to live up to something, right? However, your question of do I ever wonder, like, am I able to help people? Is what I'm doing working? Yes, of course. And that though, like I do a lot of coaching work. I do a lot of one-on-one work with people. And I used to do this in 12-step programs. I sponsored a lot of people. And it's human when somebody that you're working with, whether it's somebody I'm coaching or somebody I was sponsoring, is not doing with what you're giving them, right? And what I've learned to do over a long, long time is mostly realize like that I can only bring so much to any equation or relationship, right? It in a coaching relationship, the other person has to carry the ball. I'm there to point things out. I'm there to give suggestions. I'm there to give ideas. I'm there to give some guidance. I'm there to listen. But the other person's kind of got to carry all the water, so to speak, right? And so, but when somebody, so when somebody I'm working with is doing really, really, and they're really thriving, I try and, that feels good, but I try and remember it's because that is really, doing it. And if they're not, then I also have to realize in a lot of cases it's that person, right? Again, not that, but I always am reflective. Is what I'm offering people, is what I'm giving people, or the tools I have for people useful? Are they good? And like I said, almost all of it comes from personal experience of like, this worked and helped me. So I know that it does work and help, but not everything is for everyone. Of the trick with this stuff is to find what works for you, right? I
Yeah.
got sober in 12-step programs. A lot of people, that's not their right. So it's not that 12-step programs are bad or that person is bad. That just may not be the route, but it might be. And so same thing. So I that's kind of my answer to that, if that is helpful.
Yeah, it definitely is. What it made me think of is I occasionally look at this. I'll watch videos on YouTube by a channel called Invisible People, and it's this guy who previously was homeless, and he kind of has gone into his story. But what he does is he kind of talks to people that are currently on the street and how they got there. And what I found was so interesting is, and you even basically said it was, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't force it to drink. And what this guy, there was one time where he was interviewing this guy, and he was addicted to I think it was heroin, but he asked, like, the interviewer was just like, well, have you tried to get sober? Have you tried to overcome it? And the guy just kind of looked him in the eye and was like, I'm not ready for it, and I don't think I'm ready to get away from the drugs, so I haven't even tried.
Yep.
And that's so, for me, who is someone that has never struggled with addiction, and so the only thing that I know about drugs is what other people have said and what I learned in like high school health classes. And so like I just associate the drug with like this terrible negative, like, you shouldn't do it because of the negative repercussions. And obviously, although there's fear mongering involved in that education, there is some truth to a lot of what's being said.
Yeah.
So for me, having that understanding, it's so, I don't know, it really shows the difference in humans, period. Because it's
Right.
just the fact that there's someone out there who has that self-awareness, and he's like, I know that it's bad, I know that it's negatively impacting me, but I'm just not ready to move on.
Yep.
For me, that's a mentality that I never would have expected. But it's
Yep.
great to know that it's out there, and that, like, to get that kind of perspective is really helpful, I think.
Yeah, well, the interesting thing about addiction, right, is that for quite some time, the addict's drug of choice is actually very beneficial to them, right? Because it get, like, let's just take somebody who has really overwhelmed, right? The drugs make life bearable. The drugs in certain cases keep people alive, right?
Yeah.
It's a coping mechanism. Now, it's a coping mechanism that if you do it enough will turn on you, right?
Yeah.
It will turn on you. But the reason people struggle so much with addiction is they're getting something out, right? They're getting something out of it. And so for me, so I had like a 6-year run, 18 to 24, although I did drink again in my adult life for a couple of years, and then I've been sober now about 13 years. In that 18 to 24 range, right? The first several years I knew, like, there's something off about the way I use. Like I use way more and way the other people around me, but I don't care, right?
Yeah.
And it was interesting because what happened to me was I started having consequences, right? I lost my driver's license. I didn't have a car. I was broke. I never went to college, all this stuff. But that was all stuff I just did not care. It just wasn't important to me. And then one time I got a opportunity to apprentice with a classical guitar. And it was a real opportunity for me as a musician. And I had a chance to really do something that really mattered to me. And I could not stay sober enough to, and that for me was when I went, oh, because suddenly there was something I really wanted to stay sober for, and I couldn't. Now that did not lead to me getting sober. I had several more years to go, but that said that it just made me think of that. But yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people who are addicts, most people who are addicts who are very far down the path, particularly if you're homeless, you know you have a problem. The question is, do you actually believe that getting better would be better than what you have?
Yeah.
And the thing for a lot of addicts is when they first get sober, it's worse, right? It's worse because you've got this, you've got this person who can't cope with life. And then you take away the one coping mechanism, and all of a sudden it hurts, right? And so I always say getting sober sucks. Being sober is awesome, but getting there, that first, quitting drinking in those first few weeks and months can be real, you know. And it's because again, the drugs and alcohol are doing something for someone. Now, at a certain point, there's a ratio of like how much pleasure or enjoyment or comfort are you getting out of it versus how much pain is it causing you. And sooner or later in every addict or alcoholic's life, that ratio is more on the pain side. And the question is just how far does it have to go that way before you to get out? And some people never do. And it's a mystery to me why some people get sober and others don't. I really have no idea.
And that's something that, again, just going back to what we said earlier, because it's so different for everybody, like there's no way to even make a guess on why some people do and some people don't. Like I don't know. There are so many different factors that
Yep.
to consider that it's really impossible.
Yeah. I mean, in 12-step programs, what we see is that people that do kind of the suggested program and really do it, those people tend to stay sober. But the question so the obvious thing a lot of people say was, well, who gets sober is who does the work. Oh, but why are some people willing to do the work and others aren't? That's the underneath it. Why was I willing to keep doing it when other people did it just as good as I did and just as hard as I did, and then finally stop it? What is that mechanism? And like you said, there are so many factors that I think I don't think we'll ever know.
Without a doubt. Um, I have a few more questions that I'd like to ask you,
Yeah.
but my computer is being a little. I think it's cutting out occasionally for some of the audio that you're giving. So I've gotten the bulk of it, but it has not been perfect. So I think what I'd like to do is just kind of wrap this up, and then maybe in the future, if you're interested, I could have you on again whenever my setup isn't garbage, and then we could continue this discussion another time in the future. But if there's anything that you'd like to shout out yourself that you think it would be helpful for people to know about, just what you do, feel free, take the floor.
Yeah, no, I mean, I just say, if anything I've said is resonant with people, go to oneyouFeed.net and you can listen to the podcast and find me there and all that. And, my advice for people who are struggling with things is just keep, try something else, try something else. It can take a while, but keep trying. That's my main thing with addiction is, don't give up. That's it.
Yeah, I mean, when you give up, that's when you lose any kind of hope or you can't hold on to anything, it becomes way harder
Yep.
and to try to get that back. So I would piggyback on that and say really try to listen to what he's saying. So thank you for being on this episode of Acceptable Madness. You've been a great guest. I thought this was a really insightful and educational conversation for me, and I imagine it will be for a lot of my viewers also. So thank you for coming by, Eric, and hopefully I'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you. It was a real pleasure. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.